tell the story of the Rancho period, the time of the Moragas that lived here. This is the Mexican era, between the missions and the gold rush, that we don't talk about much in fourth grade California history, but really, really a critical period. Many of you already know and understand that. Just a little background on myself. As Tara mentioned, I grew up here in Orinda. When I was about 10 or 11, a book on the history of Orinda came out. And there on page 5 or 6 was this picture, this Moraga Adobe. And I was a pretty know-it-all 10 or 10 or 11-year-old. How can there be such an old thing in Orinda? I never heard about this. That's just awful that there's such something like this that's just gone unappreciated. Well, little did I know that 40 years later, I would be trying to rectify that situation, but here we all are. The Moraga Adobe was part of a 13,000-acre land grant. Was given in 1835 to Joaquin Moraga and his cousin Juan Bernal. Bernal's a name you probably know from the area. And this was a big triangular area. So we are up here right now in Orinda. This would be downtown Lafayette over here on the freeway going through. Then the town of Moraga, what you think of the town of Moraga, is down here. So this huge triangular area down here. And the Adobe was located over on this one side. So to appreciate how big that is, this is kind of all of Contra Costa County. And you can see a good swath of it. All of a sudden, you use Moraga Adobe, the Rancho Laguna de Palos Colorados. The Laguna referred to a little pond that isn't there anymore near Camp Linda High School. Palos Colorados was the redwood trees. Because down in this far, whoops, sorry, go back. Wrong button. Down in the far little corner down here is near the town of Canyon, and there were redwood trees down there. So that's really where the name of this big rancho came from. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, I wouldn't mind someone giving me 13,000 acres in La Miranda. What do I need to do that? Well, back then you had to know someone. And the Moragas did know someone, because even by the time of this, the Moragas had been in the area a while. So to go back, we have to go back into history just a little bit. Here, July 1776. I think we all have an idea about July of 1776. We can get an image in our mind of what's going on there and the efforts to form a new established country and new settlement, all of that. So form that picture in your mind. That's July of 1776. And I'll forgive you if this isn't what you pictured. This is Jose Joaquin Moraga. Jose Joaquin Moraga is the grandfather of Joaquin Moraga, whose Adobe house we'll be talking about today. The grandfather, Jose Joaquin Moraga, is shown here at the Golden Gate. And he was on an expedition to settle in San Francisco area. He had come up, so he'd come up from Mexico, but he was part of the Anza expedition. He was the second in command of this. The Anza expedition was the first real civilian attempt to settle in at least northern California. And 240 some odd men, women, children all came from Tupac, Arizona, right on the Mexican border, and came by foot all the way up. Monterey was really their target. And about 1,200 miles on foot. And it's quite a story. If you travel all around California, you'll see these signs. You'll see down in Santa Barbara. You'll see them out in Pittsburgh. Wherever the Anza expedition went, there is now a historic trail that's been established. But the Anza expedition came up to San Francisco. Jose Joaquin Moraga established the Presidio, and he founded Mission Dolores. So really, you talk about founding fathers of San Francisco. Jose Joaquin Moraga has got to be, probably the number one in terms of he was the leader of those initial efforts. They chose the sites. If that wasn't enough, he went on and established the Pueblo, which meant a non-military, non-mission settlement in San Jose. And that was really the first, civilian Europeans living in the Bay Area. That was in 1777. He stayed in the Bay Area until 1785, and he commanded the Presidio until his death at that time. And he's buried at Mission Dolores in San Francisco. This is an image of his marker. Well, Jose Joaquin Moraga, obviously very well established. He had a son. His son's name was Gabriel Moraga. Gabriel Moraga was also very influential in the Spanish military. He led a bunch of explorations throughout the Central Valley. They assigned names throughout as they went there. If you go in the Central Valley or the Sierra foothills, you see a Spanish name, good chance it came and it was named during these Moraga expeditions. So names you might hear like Sacramento or San Joaquin, little things like that that we use every day. All of these things were named as they went. And Gabriel Moraga, there are transcripts of some of these early investigations, and they're quite interesting to read. So now we're in the middle generation. We have Jose Joaquin Moraga, and we have Gabriel Moraga. Now Gabriel Moraga in turn has a son, and now we're getting somewhere. Joaquin Moraga. Joaquin Moraga was born in Mission Soledad, 1793. He tried to stint in the military, didn't go as well as it did for his father and his grandfather. So by the time he was 25, it was pretty much already done. At the same time, we've got Mexico taking over Spanish control. So the whole mission system is thrown into turmoil. Missions had a lot of support from the Spanish government, not so much from the Mexican government. So, but he goes to work at Mission San Jose, and he's put in charge of the herds. So he's got all the cattle ranching. They had thousands of acres that were assigned to the mission back then. Now, back then, you think, well, why do they need all of those cattle? They can't eat them. No, they don't eat them. The California hide trade was a huge thing in the 1830s into the 1840s. The main contact that America, New England, had with California was through the leather trade. Ships would come and they'd go up and down the coast for a year or more, gradually collecting hides that people would bring down. So this is a picture of guys carrying these hides on their heads out to a boat, which has come ashore. He's going to take it back to a larger boat. And they would shove them into the holds, just like putting pieces of paper into a stack until the boats were just stuffed with hides. And then they'd go back to Boston and turn them into belts and shoes and whatnot. There were over 1 million head of cattle in California in 1840. So this is the time when the Moragas are saying, okay, we're going to establish one of these ranchos. Now this time the ranchos had taken over from the mission. Big land grants were being doled out by the Mexican governor. I told them about the 13,000 acres that they put in for in 1835. It took 6 years of red tape, even back then, for it to become final. But in 1841, they did finally get the approval to go ahead and really take ownership of the ranch, although they've been working there for some years. So Joaquin Moraga constructs an adobe house in 1841. It's 2 rooms. It's right, this is now the house we're talking about now. It's up on a hill. There's a nice spring there. The walls are 3 feet thick. The wall separating the 2 rooms is 2 feet thick. The beams and the floor were unusual for adobes at that time. Maybe not the beams so much, but the floor. I mentioned how they got on the corner of the rancho was down in town of Canyon with the redwood trees. So the Moragas had a redwood floor in their adobe, which was pretty hoity-toity for back in those times. Pretty, more typically you'd have just packed dirt. You wouldn't have anything on the ground. So the fact that the Moragas had a wood floor was quite nice. We know that Indian labor was used to help build the adobe. We'd still like to understand a little bit more of the dynamics of how all that worked, but Indian labor was a big part of all of these ranchos there. And the Mexicans and the Indians worked it out. That's another area of investigation for us. So 1841, they had the first 2 rooms. 1848, relatives start showing up. It's pretty nice out there in Moraga. Maybe we want to move in. So we have to expand it 5 rooms. So 3 more rooms are added on to those original 2. We're going to keep coming back to this floor plan. So you have to ignore a little bit of it for now, because the Adobe has gotten bigger, it's gotten smaller. But at the very beginning, we had 2 Adobe rooms. So we had a big room and a smaller one. These are the 3-foot walls that we talked about. And then, like I say, in a few years, they needed to expand it. They added 3 more little rooms across the back. There's a porch that goes all the way around. And some of these labels are interesting, and we'll see in the next slide that these are from some of the Moraga family. They're a little easier to read here. So this, it says Indian women and Indian men. So the Indians are living there, working as servants basically, but they aren't like off on their own. They're living right out, they're living under the same roof, literally. This is a diagram that was drawn by a Moraga granddaughter. And this is one of our best sources of information about how the Adobe really was. This says parlor, also for dancing. Back then, fandangos were a big deal, and we'll talk about that in a second. But they would have dance parties. They'd go on for a day or 2. Now, the Moragas, if you had the choice of dancing in someone's dirt floor or dancing on someone's bouncy redwood floor, I think you'd think, oh, that redwood floor looks pretty good. So indeed, the Moragas were very popular. Their fandangos were great because you could dance all night and bounce around the floor and not be filthy as a time. It says 3 years in construction, it cost $9,000 to build. Yeah, it's real money back then. It's probably not as much as you'd imagine. So life on the rancho, it's a cattle ranch. Maybe you spend any time on a cattle ranch today, probably not all that different. More pickup trucks and dogs, but other than that, you still have to, the cows are out there, you have to do a gathering, you have to bring them in when it's time. So life on the rancho was all about the vaqueros. So these are the cowboys. Some were of more Mexican descent. A lot of them had a very strong Indian component in their descent. It was the ultimate meritocracy. If you could ride a horse and you could break a horse, then you had a job as a horseman. And they were very skilled horsemen. They're legendary. People come from other parts of the country that cannot believe what they see in California in terms of horsemanship that's on display. But they were the original work hard, play hard kind of people. I mentioned the fandangos, and this time I think the macho rancho guys probably wouldn't really like these outfits. I don't know how accurate this is with the pointed toes. It doesn't look very ranchy to me. It says "Lo Fandango." I think this is probably a French interpretation or some sort. But nevertheless, dancing and music and drinking and gambling and all of that was a big part of life on the rancho. These different families that had these ranches would go over and, like I say, spend the weekend at each other's houses and have a great old time. So, now you're thinking, okay, I really got it made. I got my 13,000 acres. Got some guys working the horses. We've got, got parties coming right up. Martinez's are coming over next month. Whatever. So everything seems great. It's pretty idyllic. What could go wrong? About 35 miles away, up in Sonoma, there's a little trouble going on. Some guys up there, they're rebelling against the Spanish. They say, well, we're out here on our own. We want to have more say in what's going on. And sure enough, 1846, so things go on, things degrade between the Mexicans and the U.S. And we get to 1848. February of 1848, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo ends the Mexican-American War. We just had the 175th anniversary of this a week ago. But at that point, California is no longer part of Mexico, and California is part of the United States. We joke, we have kids who want to tell about the Adobe, that's the riddle we give them. So this building is 180 years old, 180 years old. It was built in Mexico, it's here in Orinda, it's never been moved. We ask people to sort that out. They do noodle it through. They usually adults adults need more of a hint than the kids sometimes, to be quite honest on that. So, the Adobe was in Mexico, now it's in the United States, at least U.S. territory. So everything's different. So this is obviously a huge, huge shift. This is, this is the event of the decade. This is the event of the century. In reality, history has shown this wasn't even the biggest, for around here, this was not the biggest event of even the preceding 2 weeks. Because, about 100 miles away, a man found a shiny rock in a ditch. This is James Marshall. He's working up at the Sutter's Mill, out early in the morning. I like this guy in the background. I imagine him running over. He's the original gold rush. So, this pastoral, no one knows about it. It's the Spanish, it's the Mexican, it's off on that other ocean. No one cares. We get leather from there. That's about all people knew about California. All of a sudden that changes. In a year, we got neighbors. This is San Francisco Harbor. Probably taken around where the Transamerica Pyramid is, I'd guess. Something like that. All the ships in the harbor left. Captain's off panning for gold. He's not here sitting on the ship anymore. A lot of these ships end up getting buried. Used as fill in financial history.
Is that a very early photograph?
It says 1849, so I assume it's pretty early. I think it's an actual photograph. Yeah, it looks like a photograph. It looks like this was, marked by writing on a glass negative. It would have been back then. But yeah, I assume it to be. I forget the source on that picture. But it's just making the point that discovery has indeed happened. So this starts a chain of events. It affects the Moragas. It affects all the families that got these big ranches. This map's a little bit lopsided because north is this way. This shows the bay. And this shows Oakland, Berkeley. And up here is that triangle. So here's the Moragas. This would be the Peralta family's rancho. They had pretty much all of Oakland and Berkeley. And then the members of the Castro family were kind of on both sides. So there's all of these big families. And they all had to defend these claims. It wasn't enough to say, oh, well, the Mexican government gave me, the governor said I can have this land. They had to go through and defend these claims. Now, it's okay. So they say, well, what do you have to describe this? Well, so we have a map. Because everyone had to have a map, a decennial, when you applied for the land grant. So the Moragas had a map. This isn't their map. This is a much later map. This is the Moragas map. Maybe you'd like to go into court and defend your land claim with this.
That's cool.
Is there another one? Yeah, there's another one. So, it was a tough road to hoe. The Moragas, the other families, by and large, didn't speak a lot of English, certainly not enough to go to court. So they had to hire American lawyers and spend a lot of money doing that. They finally, the Moragas, got the title in 1855. So it took 5 years, basically, of horsing around with this. Joaquin Moraga barely lived to see that. He died just, this is January, he died in June. So 5 months, his last 5 months, he didn't have to worry so much about the government taking his land. But that wasn't the only problem. We had squatters coming in. So all the part down by St. Mary's College, that was kind of out of view from the Adobe. There were people setting up down there, just living there. And as you would imagine, during the gold rush, it's hard to keep able-bodied workers around on your rancho to help to defend it. So they've taken off to the hills too. So you have some of the Indians are left. They didn't participate in the gold rush so much. So the Moragas and the Indians are kind of left, but there's a lot of land being just sort of taken out from under them. Down in Canyon, there were a lot of lumberjacks found. Some of that land had been sold off pretty early. I won't go through all of this. This guy on the right rather, is Horace Carpentier, first mayor of Oakland, a lawyer. lawyer to the Peralta family, lawyer to the Moraga family, lawyer to many of these families. Oh, thank you. I was wondering when I get a boo or a hiss out of the audience. Usually happens as soon as the picture goes up. Rather notorious. This is just a list of one piece by one. The Moragas had to sell off land or give it to him out. He took a third of their property just as his fee. And then a lot of other pieces, as the Moragas had to sell them off or whatever, he was kind of quietly piecing it all back together. And the gist of it is by 1885, the Moragas are out. They don't own any land anymore, and virtually all that they did own, Horace Carpentier now owns. Horace Carpentier went back to Columbia University, where he's not regarded as a villain. He was regarded as a huge benefactor. I think there was even a Carpentier Hall at Columbia. So you just get booed and hissed if you go to Manhattan, but feel free out here. So there's kind of a lost period a little bit, what happened during the property changed hands a couple times. But basically by the early 1900s it's being used as a dairy and orchard property. The adobe itself, it's a glorified pile of mud, right? You know, so it's out there, it's starting to sag. They dug out a root cellar, which is a really bad thing to do. So that's starting to make the doorways fall down. The county condemned it even for use as a dairy at one point. You know, so basically saying you really shouldn't be going in that. And it was really only used for storage. So the oldest picture we have of the adobe is this one from 1922. You can see one of the residents. But you can see kind of, oh, I'm sorry. You can see the dilapidated shape of things. This is the front door and these two windows. So we're kind of at a different angle of that picture I showed you before. I do want you to note this stairway, because we're going to come back to that later. This is the back of the adobe, about the same time. So now we're looking at those 3 rooms that were added back in the back for the relatives when they came over. They obviously didn't do as good a job with those for the relatives, because these parts are falling down much, much worse. They're much worse repair in general than the original 2 rooms. This is the adobe about the same time. As you can see, so we here at Orinda would be back over the hill, over here. This is Moraga Way, coming from Orinda. Miramani High School would probably be down here, about where I'm standing. So this is the adobe, a barn, another separate building. It's not there, no trace of it. But looking out over Delray School would be right here. This is kind of looking back the other way. So this is, Orinda's now off this way. This is the road to Moraga. Adobe's up here on the hill, so you can kind of see it. They have a good vantage point up there. And then this is the view from the adobe, looking towards St. Mary's College and Mount Diablo out here, and then the whole Moraga Valley. Miramani High School will be right here. Here's that picture again, the one that suckered me in all those years ago. But you can see this is, so 1935-ish, things are really looking bad for the adobe. It is not going to last. You can see the sagging, the porch is gone, the rock foundation's all exposed here. In the back, the walls are really gone at this point. There's some stubs left. That's it. So, a few years left, would you say, at this point? And it would have been, if this lady hadn't stepped in. This lady is Catherine Irvine, of the Irvine family of Irvine, California. At that point, the Irvine Company was kind of the successor to all of that property the Carpentier had put back together. The Irvine Company and the Utah Company were different incarnations, but they basically owned all of Moraga back then. And we don't quite know what inspired her, and whether it was a coincidence or not, but at the time of the 100th anniversary of the adobe, about 1941, she embarks on a large renovation of it. And here you can see some workers hauling away by hand, wheelbarrows full of adobe bricks and stacking up here. So this is looking at the back there. So you can see they've torn off a lot, the roof's kind of open, but a lot of activity going on. They rebuilt the walls. Kind of look at the front at the same time. This is more showing how bad it are. But so they cover the plaster, and they basically try to turn it into a 1940s era suburban type house. And that's what they did. So this is the way the Adobe looked after that renovation. You can't quite see here, but there are bedrooms that were added back on to that original floor plan. So now, we're at the peak size for the Adobe. We had our original 2 rooms, we had the 3 rooms that were added back on for the relatives. Now, we have wood frame additions, 1940 style additions, put here a master bedroom. This was converted into a bathroom over here, another bathroom, another basement was dug, and more bedrooms. And a kitchen, an indoor kitchen, something the Moragas had never had. In the 1960s, the San Francisco Chronicle Sunday magazine came out and took pictures of the Adobe. This was after another wave of renovation by the Manuel family. So now we're in the main room here that was, so one of those 2 original 1841 rooms. You can note the redwood floor is not there, tile floor now. You can see this attractive but not original fireplace is here. The Moragas would have just had coals brought in from outside to keep heat. They didn't have a fireplace inside. In the kitchen, this doesn't do it justice, because this is all bright orange paint here. This is like full-on 60s. But in the kitchen, that's looking into the main room then. So this is the room we'll get to later. This is the one that we're going to have done as a bedroom. This is going to go back to being a bedroom, but in this incarnation, it's a kitchen. In the 1960s, it was as close as the Adobe ever got to being open to the public. The Manuel family, Don Manuel, was the head of the Moraga Historical Society and was very civic-minded and liked to have groups up there. He had 4-H kids raising animals in the barn. He had an open house party, I think once a year. There was a swimming pool. He had the town come up and use the pool. People going through taking tours. So this was the peak access time to the Adobe. Although when you start talking to people, there's more people who've been up there than you imagine because they knew various families. It was always an interesting place to go. There was historical recognition at various times. In 1954, it was made a California State Historic Landmark. It was put on the National Register of Historic Places, and then after Orinda became a city, became one of its, first batches of city landmarks. So this is a picture of the original state plaque. Sadly, as it says, it was stolen in 2010. They were out here. This was a state plaque, and this was the city plaque on the outside of the Adobe. So, I'm sure the pennies that they got melted down for are much more important. This is just some of the owners after the Irvines, the Carpentiers, the Irvines we've talked about. William White is still alive. He lived at the Adobe. He lives in Hawaii. His mailing address is still Post Office Box 1, Irvine, California. But they lived there for quite a while. And then the Manuel family, and then finally the Claxton family was the last family to live in the Adobe. And then they sold it about 15 years ago now to J&J Ranch, which is the name of a subdivision that's now going in around the Adobe. And the Grana family and John French in particular are the principals in that range. This is a, this is kind of, we're talking about the zenith, this is the nadir. This is the kind of low point for the Adobe. This is when before we knew what was going to happen, our group was just showing an interest in it. It was getting broken into every weekend. Lots of partying going on up there. And about this time is when the property changed hands, and the owners said, well, we should do something with this. We want to make sure the public's involved. So they got people from the Orinda Historical Society, that was one of those, got people from the Moraga Historical Society, Landmark Committee, other interested groups to come and take a tour through this. And we came away thinking, well, something's going to have to get done. This just isn't right. The plan of record at this time was for a subdivision to go in with 13 houses, and the Adobe would be the clubhouse for the homeowners association. So those 13 families would be welcome to come over here and have a kid's birthday party, but no one else would ever go to the Adobe. And it didn't sit well with me, it didn't sit well with a lot of us.
Right.
So just about 14 years ago, some of us met in the living room of Bobby Landers. Who's here today? Bobby, can you wave a hand there? Bobby is one of the original city council people for Orinda when it incorporated, and she has been a mover and shaker, I can tell you, since at least the time I was in 4th grade.
Oh.
So, Bobby was the one who really lit a fire under a lot of us. These were then mayors Dave Trotter of Moraga and Sue Severson of Orinda also. So it wasn't like this was flying under the radar. People knew about this project and really wanted to participate. So our group formed. I somehow got named as president. And we went back and took another tour. So this is our first time as a group in the Adobe. And we're here in that main room. You can see that fireplace is Michael Olson. He's one of the J&J Ranch people. And we went through, and you can see on the outside. Now, I'm going to remind you, I asked you to look at a stairway earlier. It doesn't look like a stairway you saw, did it? Look kind of straight when you come in. Remember that thought. But here we are walking around. As you can see, the Adobe's still in pretty good shape. It hadn't been all that long since, and this is probably a little earlier than some of those graffiti pictures I just showed you. So things were still in pretty decent shape. But then it started to deteriorate. So this is just a year later. And you can see, well, it's starting to look a little bit more decrepit up there. So we're working behind the scenes now. We're working with the J&J Ranch people where we're going through negotiations, and people are walking out of negotiations, and then negotiations have fallen through entirely. And the city has gone ahead and approved, or the planning commission has gone ahead and approved the plan with the 13 houses and the clubhouse for the Adobe and no public access and all of that. And then the town of Moraga, bless their hearts, kind of stuck their nose into it and got the Orinda City Council to encourage everyone to sit down one more time and try. And with that extra encouragement, we were able to work out, and it's I was amazed at the time, we were able to work out an agreement with the J&J Ranch people so that we could acquire the Adobe and open it to the public. So this is our little, a younger relative of mine up there at the Adobe, almost 10 years ago now, up there, shaking hands. So under this agreement that we worked out back then, so the Adobe parcel in the clubhouse scenario was a half an acre, something like that. So that got expanded to be 2.25 acres, a little bit more, including, very important to us, the not blocking the view out toward Mount Diablo and the valley right there. So the view side really got the benefit of that expansion. We will be able to open the Adobe to the public. That was number one on our list, and sure enough, the City Council agreed. So that is an important part of it. The money side, not too bad for us, really. We had to raise $500,000, basically. And we give $450 to them and keep $50 for ourselves, just to show we weren't coming over the finish line on fees. We would have 3 years to do that from whenever this got approved, and that took a while. But all of our money, all the $450, is going towards the restoration. And it was conceived of as something a little under half of the money it was going to take. And the owners, developers, are paying the remainder of it. The way the agreement works, they cannot transfer the property to us until the restoration is complete. That was a condition put on by the city. Now I use the word restoration. I'm using it a little bit loosely, and you'll see it up here. It's not legally a restoration. There's a capital R restoration implies a certain level of going back exactly the way it was. What we're doing is technically a rehabilitation, which means we are working with what we've got, but there are structural issues that can't be reversed. And just in general, we don't aspire to have it be down to the final detail the way it was originally. What we're trying to do is save the building, put it back as much as we can the old way, and fix it up so people can understand what life was like back then, even if it's not, but it's going to be a 10% asterisk maybe off in the corner. The property, was part of, this is a 20 plus acres is the whole subdivision, and this would be the 2 plus acres of the Adobe. So the Adobe's up here on kind of a little flat spot. This probably looks a little bigger than it is because of the angle, but this is the hillside coming down. This is what got those views. The Mount Diablo view is probably out at just about this angle here, so you can see it's really important to open it up. This is Delray Elementary School. This is Moraga Way. So Rinda's up here, we're up here. Moraga High School is just out of view, right here. Things go forward, approvals happen. So in 2016, we went up there with the preservation architect for the first time to have a look at, well, what is this really going to be? So this is the way it looked then. You see it's graffiti and overgrown. I won't say none of the graffiti was artistic. I mean, I have to admit that, but not quite 1840s. Here's the deed staircase again. This is in the back. Inside, little worn, a little bit worn. You can see how deep these walls are, though, with these window seats going in there. So this is the front door. This is in that big room, the window here. Looking the other way, this is the other room, other window in that same room. The kitchen, back here, the fireplace. This is outside for that same inspection. These are some of the original 1841 bricks. And what's really interesting about these, and I think is what he's picking at right here, is on the surface of these bricks, there's what appears to be horsehair sticking out. And they did use anything they could that was kind of fibrous to reinforce the bricks. So we have a hunk of that we're going to send off and confirm. Is it a horse? And if so, what kind of horse was it? Up in the attic is interesting as well. You have the adobe walls, and the roof just kind of sits on it. The sleepers here. And here you can see with these wood sleepers and a wood pin down in each one. This is all hand done. Very, very interesting. So in 2018, that 3-year window for us to raise the money actually kicked in. We've been raising money all this time. But now all of a sudden the clock's running. So in September 2018, we know we got 3 years, no more than 3 years to come up with the money or the deal's going to be gone. So this is up there kicking that off, and Dan, another younger relative, and with the traditional big check. This is taken that same day. So this is kind of what the Adobe situation was up there. So now we got a cyclone fence around. It's starting to look more like a construction site with a water tank. And here's a bulldozer digging the new road up. So this had been like through the driveway of the Adobe, and now it's like on a recessed down anything. But here's my lovely wife Teresa. But you can also see the view of Mount Diablo here, and the ridge out by Las Trampas as well. 180 years have not made the view any worse. It's pretty neat. The restoration plan calls for the Adobe to be restored back to that 5-room footprint, and I'll refresh your memory on that. The redwood floor, that bouncing floor, to be replicated. And a little back and forth on that, but it's going to have a redwood floor. We'll have an outdoor activity area for kids and school groups. School groups are going to be a big part of this. And a separate little building, you'll see. Oh. Okay, so now we're back to our diagram again. So all this that was added in the 1940s will not be there. It's not there today. But we are going back to the expanded family version. So the 2 original rooms and then the 3 Adobe rooms. So in September 2020 is about when things started in earnest up there, working on the Adobe. And here you can see on the other side, removing, this is where one of those bedrooms had been added in the 1940s. This is where the basement had been dug, the new basement had been dug in the 1940s, and all that getting reversed and filled in. Until we're back to 1848, almost. Doesn't quite look like it, but at least it's the same size and shape that it was. So that's, this is the first time we got to kind of see, well, what are we really working with? You can still see it has the wraparound porch all the way around. Inside, a little bit more demolition, a little less graffiti, but tearing up the tile floor, this fireplace, even if we wanted to keep it, which is not correct for the period, but you can see it's got some issues here, so that had to go. Outside, you can see some of the porch has been removed. This is where there's a transition between the 1840s Adobe and what was done in the 1940s when they added on those additions. These are kind of a modern Adobe-like construction, but they not done the same way as you can tell. So our plan is to open this as a museum and history center, show how the Moraga family lived, tell the story of the Moragas and other families like this. All these families had to defend their land grants and go through all of this. Fourth grade, I mentioned, California history, prime target for us. Local history, too. Third grade, local history. And then also just, there's lots of volunteer groups around Moraga, around Dorinda, and so scout groups, garden clubs. I'm sure there are a lot of people coming out here and working there. So we're looking forward to this being a place where different parts of the community can also benefit, rather than do a history geek or not. This is an early artist concept, but I'll just mention it kind of shows the basic idea. You have the Adobe, an outdoor area, and a parking area. But there's a little later version coming up. So our plan for these rooms is we're going to do some of them done up like the 1840s. You'll come in the main entrance. You'll see the living room, the main room. The kitchen, no longer orange, will be done up as an 1840s bedroom, and we'll have a dining room as well. So those will be set up with furniture, look kind of like it was. Then we'll have two more rooms that will have, at least be allowed to have a more modern look. We're going to have like a permanent museum room where we'll have exhibits showing the history of the Moragas, a lot of things I'm showing you here today. And then we'll also have a second room which will be more rotating exhibits. So we'll have it change a few times a year, maybe, or something like that. And that may have a slightly broader scope. It may not be hardcore history, hardcore related to the Moragas, but something that is somehow consistent with all of this. And again, it's to provide a little bit of a community venue. We're picturing someone will come in the front door, they'll spend a little time in the 1840s, then they'll walk over, they'll understand what they just saw, they'll see the rotating exhibit, and then they're back out. So this is just kind of a general idea of what a visitor might go through. Artist concept, this was early, still shows the fireplace, which we talked about isn't going to be there, but otherwise it shows people happily enjoying the Adobe, which is obviously what we're going to want. Period furnishings, right now our museum committee is looking into what this ought to be. We came in thinking, oh, it's all Spartan. They didn't have anything. We've learned that all those boats coming over from New England or wherever that were going to be picking up leather hides, they didn't come empty or just with rock ballast. They came with stuff to sell. And indeed, there's records that we're in the process of going through of the ships out of San Francisco Bay and which families bought what. We have yet to encounter a Moraga purchase, but it definitely shows that they weren't isolated from some of the what modern life was like in 1850. In the bedrooms, we plan to do similar things. So we'll have it done up the way that it would have been. One special exhibit that we're planning is around this Moraga saddle. Now, this is the original. This was made in 1855 in San Francisco for the Moraga family. The original is down in Los Angeles at the Autry Museum. But we are in the process of commissioning a reproduction of this saddle that will be displayed at the Adobe. It's very interesting to see the type of the shapes and the big protectors, not just a stirrup, but a protector. But if we go back to our Vaquero picture over here, you can see, yeah, indeed, that's not too different. So this is representative of what they had back in the day. So that's one thing that we are specifically planning to have inside the Adobe. We'll see. Outside, we want to have an outdoor kitchen. I mentioned the Moragas didn't eat inside, didn't cook inside, so we plan to have an outdoor kitchen. How often we can use it, we'll see, but at least we can have it and demonstrate what it was and how it did. And we'll have happy little kids that'll be beside themselves. The developers are kind of like taking this under their wing, so they're using this as a promotional thing. So this is one of the promotional signs showing artist renderings of the Adobe out here. Here you can kind of see the funny lot. So up here and the hillside down below it. This was just a schedule of money. We had to come up with different amounts at different times, including a big balloon payment at the end. So we never had any real trouble coming up with these, because we were pretty aggressively raising funds. But nevertheless, we were a little nervous about this one, especially as the pandemic took hold. But lo and behold, in about May, so a little bit after that, our big push, we crossed that 500,000 mark, which meant that we knew what was going on with the Adobe. We knew we were going to have enough money and that we were able to go forward. And that then meant that, well, it's not going to be a clubhouse anymore. So we need to have more electrical. We need to have this be a little more historically accurate and that sort of thing. And that's when we really started emphasizing the operation as well as the accuracy of the Adobe. So I belabored this stairway, and I just want to say, this is an example of something that has changed since it became known that we were going to be taking over. It was going to be a museum. The plan was just going to be to reproduce that one you saw in the pictures that had the kind of like the jog down the side. But we know that wasn't in the earliest pictures. We've discovered this picture from 1936, which is a pretty good one. It shows this little overhanging roof. And when you know what you're looking at, you can look at other pictures and see that too. This is a different Adobe. This is down in Salinas, but it shows how they would also have access through a ladder up into the attic. Not a stairway. This is one of the workman's ladder here. So this was a change that we went in and had that redone. You'll kind of see it in a minute how that turned out. Inside, we're planning to leave a section of the original Adobe wall open. You can see the original straw here that was done 180 years ago. Inside, these are the two rooms that will be more in the museum. This is the big museum room, which is it's a great feel in this room, with the thick walls and the high ceiling and everything. And this will be our rotating exhibit room, which has nice north-facing windows on the side, which aren't particularly original, but make a nice gallery kind of feel in there. For research, we're now looking, I mentioned, the ship's logs. This is a tax document from the Contra Costa Historical Society archives. Thank you very much. That shows the 1855 tax bill for the Moraga Adobe. It has 60 horses. That's $1,065. 80 head of cattle is worth $12.80. So that works out to about $18 a horse and $16 a cow. And they had pigs and sheep and 2 wagons, $50 each for wagons. Came to $3,820 is sort of the net operating worth of the ranch. That's about $130,000 today. But this is an example of the kinds of things we know are lurking out there in some of your archives and in other places where we can get a little more detail, a little bit more flavor and nuance into what the lives were really like back then, not just the 30,000 foot view we talked about.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
That last slide, so the total tax bill was $3?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, 1.3%.
I think when I was doing, I think it was about like $34 each, something like that. So that's about $100. Not bad. So what's next? We're developing some more plans for programs and things like that. Budgeting and new volunteer opportunities. And I am missing some of my slides, actually. I'm putting a bunch of ones that show like the current state of things. So I might finish up and then still come back and show you a couple more things. I talked about this as a new beginning. That was maybe the talk. So what we're really trying to do here is to give the Adobe a new start. It came pretty close to being dissolved back in the 1930s by the weather and neglect. Came close to being lost to the public 10 years ago because of it being in private ownership, always had been, and was going to stay that way. So we're working hard to open this up to the public. But we do still need your help. So what are ways that you can help? We can always donate. We're not proud about that to get these up and running. We also have a paper program where you can buy a paper that's personalized. I'm realizing now why why we're looking at the wrong slides here. So I will be able to come back and recover in a minute. But we have volunteer opportunities to be part of the team. It's really opening stuff, and it's spreading the word. There's a lot of name recognition issues that we still have that we would like to get out there and have more people understand about the Adobe. And that was going to be all I was going to show you, but if you'll excuse me just a couple of minutes, I really did want to give you a little bit more about what's like up there. That bit there, right? If you just bear with me for 1 second, I'll have to step down to my computer. So hang on. Talk among yourselves. Show the whole downhill part of the Adobe parcel, which is over here. But the road comes up here. The weird thing about the Adobe is we talk about the front all the time. It's actually the side away from the street is the front door. So someone will come in here, we have a little parking lot, come around, we have a nice view area here that looks out toward Mount Diablo and the whole Moraga Valley. This is where we plan to have a donor wall and recognition. I mentioned we're selling these personalized pavers, and that's probably where they're going to be displayed over here. Come around and then into the Adobe, and then we talked about how we'll go through the 1840s and out here and then out to an outdoor area. This is a little support building that's over on the side. And then, like I say, we're going to have a path that goes down here. So let me skip over the ones you've seen here. You saw that one. This is down below the Adobe. So this is that part that wasn't just shown in the landscape plan. This is the downslope. This is where our renegotiation kept the house from being right here. And this is where there'll be a pedestrian path up from the bottom. Nice view of the down part of the slope. You saw that. But this is the outside the Adobe now. You can see this is our reconfigured attic access with a little overhanging roof. And this part of the roof that had been removed back in the 1940s has now been reconstructed. So the porch now wraps all the way around the way it used to. And remember, you're going to sleep out here as a servant. You definitely want all the roof you can get. So this is our gallery room. It's been rotating exhibits. That's the museum room there. We got a new roof put on. So this is, you can see this is a nice flame retirement shingle roof. Not easy to get a wood shingle roof put on, and basically we called in all our favors of the fire department on this roof. So as a result, some other things like, well, we have to have double pane windows because that's another fire trade-off. So we basically used all our credit. But the roof turned out very nicely and is very, very important to keeping the original feel of the building. Outside, you can see some of the trim work. It has been reused, and then other pieces have been recreated to match. When we started out, we imagined that was maybe from the 1940s, all these fancy moldings, but as you saw some of those old pictures, it's not true. They were using this stuff very early on, trying to be fancy. The Moragas were very influenced by the Americans in that regard. This is our little outbuilding, so we've got 2 little restrooms and storage area, and that's our little parking area there. So when you come up, you'll have that. We went through this, and I think that was it. I just wanted to show you a couple of those last construction pictures, the way things are wrapped up now. So anyway, thank you so much for having me here today. This has been like I say, a long time coming. The question on all your minds is going to be, well, when is it finally going to be open? 14 years, I mean, I might be able to go another 4. No. We really are, I said this last year, so I'm going to think to myself, I said this last year. We really think that this year there will be a way to get up to the Adobe. We think we'll be able to complete the purchase. We think the work is on track to be done maybe this summer. So maybe like an early fall kind of date or something like that. You should be imagining going up there for at least a ribbon cutting ceremony and a walkthrough. And then we're going to be working on the content of the museum, the landscaping, and all of that. So we have a few years more of disorder, maybe, but there will be something to come see, and I hope we all do as soon as it's available. So thank you all very much. Maybe if there's any questions, I'd be happy to take some. Yeah, we're here.
So the landscaping plan, were you putting in native or you thought about putting
Yeah, we've thought about both of those things. The landscaping plan at that level is still just getting worked out. I mentioned there were a couple of gardening groups that are very interested in helping us, but yeah, we're interested in a combination. It's an interesting point you bring up about the natives and things that they may have cultivated, but certainly the regular plants that we're growing here, as well as what the Moragas and several families may have grown in their own little garden. That hand-drawn diagram from the granddaughter says garden right outside the front steps, but we don't have a lot of detail exactly what that is. But we're going to try with other plantings, things like that, to at least be consistent with the era, but it's not well documented either. And a lot of these things, it was a ranch, so they weren't gardening for aesthetics. So I think we may ultimately want something that probably looks nicer than it actually was. But as long as what's there is defensible, I think that would be a good thing.
Is it gated area, can you go up there and look at it?
Yes, you can go up there. It is, I think it's a private road, but it is open to the public. It's Adobe Lane. You can get there just to the other side of Orinda. But yeah, you're welcome to drive up there and unofficially at least park in our little parking lot and walk around. You didn't hear me say that because we don't own the Adobe. But people do. But yeah, I mean, you just kind of see what I just showed you in those pictures. It kind of looks like a construction site now, but you absolutely can go up there and the roads open. There's families living across the street now, so it's not just a proposed development. It's happening. More questions?
Wasn't the outhouse?
Oh, for the Moragas? That's a question my wife would ask. She always asks things very quickly. I honestly don't know. I don't know. We know that, not that kind of refuse, but we know there was a little bit of a garbage pile dumped down the hill a little bit. And we've been talking to the archaeology department out at St. Mary's about, excuse me, after we take ownership, them coming out and doing some digging around in sites that were identified in a early on study for part of this project as likely to have artifacts, at least from the Moraga era. We haven't really found any Indian artifacts up there. We have found some pieces of pottery and things like that.
Yeah, so that plan you showed from the granddaughter, Ella.
Yeah,
was
Ella.
learning English. Do you know when the family went from being Spanish-speaking to English-speaking?
Well, as I remember, I think Ella Moraga was a member of the Fish family. You know Fish Ranch Road out here. The Fish family was another early Anglo family on this side of the hills, and so she presumably was English speaking from that. I think the subsequent generations each would have known more and more English. But Joaquin Moraga, it's a little unclear whether he was literate at all, and if so, how much English he spoke. Or not those are two connected. Also, how much English he spoke. Yeah, Lance.
I think so.
Oh, actually, let me take a little 1 second. I want to introduce our next questioner. Is Lance Beeson, who is a direct descendant of Joaquin Moraga, is a member of our board and a founding member of our group and a huge conduit of information and contacts for our group with what's called the Farniamas, which is a heritage group from that era, as well as a lot of other good contacts that we've made. So anyway, with that introduction, Lance, would you like to?
Yeah, I just want to address this question. You know, there's a picture in that, I believe, the history of Orinda book where it shows some school children. I get confused between Moraga's Karate book and the Orinda book. It's some of the school children and it's members of the family going to public school. And so that would be like, that was 1892. So they probably weren't necessarily in the Adobe, but they were still around. That would be the earliest time, because they were all Spanish speaking. Yes.
Yeah, the Moraga family was actually very involved in the first, in setting up, it was in the first school in Orinda, the first school in this part of Orinda, and it was just called the Moraga School. And it was located near where the McDonald Nursery is on Moraga Way right now. So yeah, the Moraga families and education around here is well known. They donated the land for that school we built.
So have you run across any family letters, anything else that would describe their living conditions or
We don't have a lot from the Moragas themselves. One very good source that we have is there was a man named Joseph Lamson. Joseph Lamson was from back in New England. He was an artist and sometimes writer. But he spent quite a while in California in the 1850s and early 1860s, and for a time was living out the outskirts of Moraga, kind of on the way to the town of Canyon. And he describes various encounters he has with the Moragas. He talks about them doing their roundup and talks about it was 102 the day old Joaquin died, little slices of life like that. In particular, Lamson wrote a 4 or 5 page detailed description of a New Year's Eve party, a New Year's fandango, that he went to. He's either New Year's 1854 or 1855. 1854. So it would be old Joaquin's next to last New Year's, I guess. But it's very interesting because in that book he describes in quite a lot of detail the inside of the adobe, which our museum committee is very thankful for. He says in the bedroom there were 2 beds and they had canopies, and he says that the main room was empty except for a timepiece. So apparently they had a clock that they didn't move or something like that. Now they probably moved furniture away for the party and all that sort of stuff. But he talks about the walls being papered, wallpapered. That was a surprise. But it turns out, one of these surprises that was like, really? And then it turns out, yeah, really. So there's a professor down at Cal State Monterey that you actually saw in that attic opening picture down in Salinas, and Ruben Mendoza, and he confirmed that, wallpaper was a thing in these houses. Again, it was part of the Mexican families that could afford it, wanting to seem stylish. They didn't want to seem out of touch with what the Americans were doing. At that level, it was bad enough they could hardly talk to them. They at least wanted to look like they were living the lifestyle. So anyway, so there are some second-hand things. There are some other descriptions. There's Henry Harwood. It was a Moraga resident that overlapped with the Moraga family and talks quite a bit about them, knew the family, talks about them being nice folks and all that kind of stuff. So we haven't found a lot of written stuff from the Moragas themselves. Going back to the grandfather, Jose Joaquin Moraga, we do want to do a little more research of the Presidio, because they have some documents, and there's a lot of it got sent back to Spain. But they do have things that are from his era that we're hoping to tie into all of this. And then Gabriel, the son, the in-between generation, who did all the exploring. There are diaries, both from him and from various people on those expeditions that did a good account of those. But those don't really pertain to the Adobe so much. And Gabriel was the least in the Bay Area of the 3. Yeah, way back.
Now, who are you going to be working with to make sure the narrative is not only Spanish, Mexican, but is California Indians? Because in recent years, we're trying to look at a narrative that's broader than what we used to have 15 years ago. And what you have is an opportunity to provide that narrative with a brand new, restored building like this. So who is going to be your
well, we haven't identified and say, oh, we're going to go to this authority or these representatives. But I will say that it's a particular interest of mine, and I think our groups as a whole, what really was that relationship between these Mexican families and the Indians. It's become clear to me that the more you read, the less obvious it is, because it seems like, particularly after the Americans came in, the Indians and the Mexicans were almost like they're almost stuck together at that point, because they were mutually non-assimilated and couldn't hold their own in the new wave of Americans coming in. And they talked about how a lot of the labor force would disappear and all that sort of thing. But even before that, it's pretty clear. Like in that Lamson story about New Year's, he talks about, it's not just Mexicans and Anglos. The Indian servants, they're there. The kids are running around. They're like part of the family. We showed you how they lived right there on the porch with them. If they, if there was a lot of antagonism, maybe that wouldn't have been their arrangement. So I'm very curious as to what that is. So I'm going in with an open mind. I didn't talk so much about that today because I honestly feel like I don't really know. But we've have been, at various times we've touched on that with different people in different societies. There's, but I'm all ears if you have a particular person or group that you think would be good to work with. I want to make sure that we keep it focused on things we want to keep it focused on, but tell that whole story, if you can understand sort of like that distinction. We don't have the time or space or volunteer staff to go off on too many tangents, but we do really want to make sure that that we find out some of these unanswered questions and tell that story. Yes, ma'am.
I'm on the board of the Richmond Museum Association, and for the past 2 years, we've been working with a group, with Corinna Gould, and Greg Castro, and they're also associated with Malcolm Margoli, who wrote the definitive book on the Ohlone cuttings in the Bay Area. And so I could connect.
That's the Ohlone way? Is that his name?
Yeah, something like that. And so, and there's a group that are that's working with us. We channeled a grant for them through our RMA, and so I can connect you with those folks.
Yeah, I think that would be great. I think that's exactly the kind of thing that we want to do. Like I say, we really are all about facts. We really want to find out what those really were.
We have an interactive centennial language exhibit with a touch screen where you can get the English word, a picture, and then touch a button and a voice speaking the native word.
Oh, that's great. That might be separate from all this. We have to plan exhibits and things like that. So I'm interested in it just at that level as well. Thank you. We'll definitely look into that. Way back.
Yeah, any correspondence between John Marsh and Moraga? It seems like they both built adobes, they both, had land grants, they both died. I mean,
you would think. I mean, they were definitely contemporaries, right here, 20 miles apart and all of that. I don't recall anything specific between the Marshes, or John Marsh and the Moragas. That doesn't mean it didn't happen, but so far I have not uncovered that. If anyone has any leads along those lines, or with other, more about the Marshes and the other rancher families even might be insightful.
but he hired Indians and had an adobe and built a house.
Absolutely.
Did the same things.
Absolutely. All these stories have a lot of commonality, yet each one has its own specifics too about how that particular circumstance worked out. So. Anything else I can tell you?
One last question, you probably mentioned this, but I missed it. So who will eventually be the owner of that property?
Yeah, they are.
Friends of
Yeah, the Friends of the Adobe will be the owners of that as a 501c3. So they don't have to pay property taxes at least. But yeah, so what we're waiting on right now is for the restoration work to be completed per the terms of the city of Orinda. That's not every piece of work that we need done. We know there's going to be landscaping still going on, things like that. But the core work that they're obliged to do, I think they're on track to finish it to this building season, let's just say, so this year. So that would mean that we would take ownership in sometime in the fall, and things like that. So we have the money ready and waiting in the bank. I'll mention that we're pretty far along in the process of getting a state grant for $250,000, which we also expect will come in time to be part of that. So we won't have to deplete all our funds to write that big check, and we won't lose any momentum going forward. But that's kind of the state we're in now. Is the money's ready and waiting, and we just need to see it get done.
Is that a ownership?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's where there was
The upkeep.
yeah,
Right?
that's right. So we are going to have some ongoing expenses for that. They will probably increase over the years. I mean, at first there shouldn't be as much maintenance since everything is new and freshly painted and just put in and everything like that. But that will increase over time. So we're in the process of putting together an operating budget, what we think those kinds of expenses will be. A little sticker shock when I saw your $200,000 expenses last year at the Contra Costa Society. So I don't think we'll be in that ballpark for a while, but we will have, certainly just operational fees. We're going to have, janitorial service and all that. Oh yeah, one big thing that we are having to do on our dime now is a security system for the Adobe, and that is actually happening now. So even though it's not our building yet, it's a little late to put it in after all that work's done. So now in conjunction with the electrical work that's going on at the Adobe, we're putting in fire and intrusion alarm. And the fire alarm is something that the city requires, and intrusion alarm is something common sense requires.
And Mayor's wife was ill.
All right, well, again, thank you all.